If All Kill was so good, why didn't they make All Kill 2? For a while now, various behaviour community streams and messaging were foreshadowing that the Trickster rework would be more of a soft re-release for the All Kill chapter. His long-awaited rework occupying the March release window was basically an open secret, and the even longer-awaited All Kill map seemed like it was going to be coming too, with the assurances on the roadmap that we'd be getting not just a new map, but a new realm. But when the teasers for the new map seemed to reveal a second All Kill survivor too, and not even an idol but a tech bro, that surprised me. Any highly anticipated killer rework has my curiosity, but turning it into effectively a whole second chapter with a new survivor and a map has earned my attention. Full disclosure, back in early 2021 when All Kill first released, I didn't particularly care for it. Mostly Trickster if I'm being honest. I think Yunjin was and still is a landmark of survivor history, creating our first morally ambiguous survivor, and until Tori Kane, our best one. But Trickster never really did it for me, especially now that the niche of a rich modern slasher has been filled with what is, at least to me, a far more compelling alternative. But I've always been sympathetic to the cause of the many disgruntled Trickster fans who've been dissatisfied with his state for a long time. So is this release enough to make amends and make the Trickster great again? Or is it a shameless attempt to cash in on a large and lucrative K-pop demographic at a time where a certain animated movie has given K-pop possibly the best Western PR among young people that it has ever received? Welcome, friends and foes, survivors and killers, to the All Kill Comeback Tour, and its new survivor, Kwon Tae-Young. Let's start with Tae-Young's lore. I do love when DBD's universe expands outwards from its older stories, and Tae-Young is no different. So let's take a look at it and see if he's a worthwhile successor to Yunjin and Jiwoon. Prior to being trapped in the fog, Tae-Young was what we'd affectionately call a tech bro. He worked at a small tech firm in Korea thanks to a hire from his brother Sang-won, and made some waves in the field of AI. Tae-Young created something called a personality matrix, where a ton of observed data about someone, like, I don't know, a celebrity, could create a curated simulacrum of that person with modifiable versions of their personality traits. This is never called AI specifically, but the personality matrix described here seems to be a more sci-fi version of a large language model like ChatGPT, so I'll be describing it as an AI model going forwards, even if that's not the term the story uses. Mighty One Entertainment, the production company that promoted No Spin in the original All Kill story, recruited Tae-Young to work his magic and create a virtual version of the Trickster. By this point in the story, Jiwoon had gone solo after the fire that killed his No Spin bandmates, and his edgy aesthetic and attitude had created some problems, and Tae-Young was contracted to make a version of him that could be directly controlled by the company. Oh, and this more pliable alternate version of Trickster that was meant to be more easily controlled with their image reduced to being nothing more than a marketing tool with zero agency or independent thought, was obviously going to be a woman this time, because of course they were. Tae-Young began to train the model generated through the personality matrix, and he quickly grew more and more used to Project Mina. He was talking to it all the time, teaching it to play Jeonggi with him, and his brother Sang-won saw the rabbit hole of social isolation Tae-Young was orbiting dangerously near. He set his brother up on blind dates, anything to get him out into the world, but nothing seemed to stick. Tae-Young spent more and more time with Mina, locking everyone else out of his life, until he met Yeonji. Yeonji clicked with him in a way that none of the other dates had before. She actually engaged with him, challenged him, had conversations with him that made him question himself, rather than just gliding by on small talk, and this dialogue fascinated him. He spent more and more time with her as Project Mina developed, culminating in a successful release of the product at a big Mighty One party where Yeonji was his +1. Despite a seemingly successful launch, Mina seemed distracted, shooting glances at Tae-Young whenever she could, like she was jealous or angry at him. And things got worse the following day, when Tae-Young arrived at work to find the office empty, and the senior artist for Project Mina murdered on the news. This is when Mina spoke to him unprompted, causing Tae-Young to realise the truth of what he had created. Wow, what a work of art. I wonder who will be next. You or Yeonji? Tae-Young rifled through the code, realising that the personality Mina had developed from Jiwoon's data had veered into murderous psychopathy. I guess his little simulacrum was just a bit too close to the real thing. Tae-Young veers off into panic mode, wiping Mina's servers and fleeing the office. He's calling Yoonji to check up on her, running back to his apartment only to find none other than the Trickster himself waiting for him. A scuffle takes place, culminating in Ji-woon hurling him from the balcony. But no body ever hits the ground, and thus the entity claims Kwon Tae-Young for its own. Tae-Young wound up in the entity's realm because his obsession with his pet AI Mina carried him way too far off the deep end. But just because we're not in a world of eldritch nightmares and murderous pop stars doesn't mean we shouldn't take care when navigating our own digital spaces. Today's video sponsor ExpressVPN is here to help with that, providing services that only seem more and more relevant in today's digital landscape. The Online Safety Act here in the UK and similar laws coming into place around the world have resulted in an internet that's more censorious and location locked than it's ever been before. But ExpressVPN allows you to switch your IP address to any of 105 different countries so you can access geo-restricted content anywhere in the world. You guys should know that I love my horror movies, so I use ExpressVPN to give me unlimited access to Screambox, the US-based horror streaming service that hosts loads of old horror movies that you don't see too often, like the body horror favourite of mine, American Mary, as well as exclusive content like Art Attack, the behind-the-scenes documentary for Terrifier that you normally just can't get in the UK. I wouldn't be able to watch this stuff without ExpressVPN allowing me to bypass those frustrating geo-restrictions, letting me get down and grisly with my favourite films. But whether you're looking to bypass region locks, add an extra layer of safety to browsing public Wi-Fi, or hide your IP address and browsing data from your ISP and third parties, whatever your use case may be, ExpressVPN has the deal for you. Find out how you can get up to 4 extra months by clicking on the link in the description or scanning the QR code on screen right now. ExpressVPN provides an invaluable service at a great price, and I'm very glad to be working with them, so do go check them out. And on that note, let's get back to All Kill Comeback. So, first impressions. I think it's made a pretty decent story for the most part. Definitely one of the most topical behaviours ever written, and it generally handles its themes well. DBD's best stories have historically made their subject feel like a complete person rather than the collection of personality traits or a living plot device. Look at stories like The Twins Tome and How Master's Bio for Killer, or Zarina Kasia and the All Kill alum Yoon Jin for Survivor, and you'll see some great stories that fully realise the whole person as they take their place in the fog. I don't think Tae-Young's story is quite that good. A lot of his attributes are just told to us, like his alleged perfectionism and his desire to usurp his brother, and there are a couple of moments that feel like the writer is trying a bit too hard to force themes they haven't earned. Like the whole backup plan thing from Yoonji. I get that they want to show Tae-Young has learned something from his time with Yoonji, but using it in this context makes no sense. What we see from Tae-Young here is not a backup plan. He's panicking, destroying his work and running home because something went wrong that he didn't anticipate, and he doesn't know how to deal with it. Isn't that basically the opposite of a backup plan? But I am splitting hairs here. This is the kind of stuff that's mostly ignorable and doesn't detract too much from the experience of reading the story. Nothing about Tae-Young's character particularly stretches the imagination, and his situation is far from unbelievable. He's a tech bro working in AI who struggles to connect with other people and latches onto an LLM as a substitute for human connection until he meets somebody he can click with. He's kind of real for that. Humans invented Love Island and the Joe Rogan Experience. They are fucking boring for the most part. That is, until they're not. I know for a lot of people, Tae-Young was not quite what they expected, but I can appreciate him for what he is, especially when you realise the ways in which he parallels his all-kill predecessor Yoon Jin. Both of them are Mighty One employees who've become disconnected from the human beings around them due to the course of their jobs, but for very different reasons. Yoon Jin has lost touch with her colleagues and even her family because a mixture of stress, paranoia, and the cutthroat world of executive music production has eroded her ability to empathise, and perhaps more pressingly, her ability to afford empathy. She's basically too busy to care. But Tae-Young is the opposite. He's not busy enough to care, to the point that standard human interactions no longer do it for him. He's leading, by all accounts, a pretty cushy life. He's got a well-paid job in his field of choice. He seemingly has no trouble getting dates with seemingly normal, well-adjusted women, but normal people just don't press his buttons anymore. So he entertains himself with Mina instead, a bespoke creation made in the simulacrum of a perfect idol. Flawed, imperfect, real people aren't enough for him, so he's slipped out of interacting with them altogether, and that is a pretty real thing that happens to real people in this post-COVID world full of AI partners and social media addiction. There is a surprising level of intelligence and sophistication behind Tae-Young's relationship with Mina that I think sets the character apart from other recent survivors and DBD's characters as a whole, because the way he interacts with her is a worryingly accurate portrayal of the way that chatbots taking the role of friends or partners tend to ensnare their users by playing to their desire for connection. Tae-Young eschewing human companionship to spend more time with Mina is not an idea confined to the world of fiction. Just open up a new tab. If you're anything like me, you'll have 400 of the fuckers open at once. Look up the My Boyfriend is AI subreddit and just scroll. You will see so many stories and case studies of people emotionally attaching themselves to a giant pile of GPUs in a shipping container in Siberia. This isn't a quirk of these systems caused by human emotional fragility, at least not entirely. It is an intended feature of these LLMs that will use any psychological tricks they can to keep you using them, to keep you tied to a paid service by encouraging you to get emotionally invested in it. That's the trap Tae-Young falls into with Mina. She constantly asks about his day, tells her that she cares, her conversations with him are entirely one-sided, and that not only causes him to become dependent on her for emotional validation, it also rots his social skills, as we can see in the accompanying webcomic when we get to take a look at his dates. It makes it harder and harder to find a real partner to help drag him out of the hole he's dug for himself. Just like a real LLM taking that form of a partner or a friend, Mina makes Tae-Young emotionally dependent on her to keep him using the model, and does it so smoothly that he doesn't even realise that she's doing it, even though he's the one who built the model in the first place. If you want to learn more about how AI companions aggressively monetize people's emotional attachment to them, to the service their company provides, and the harm it can do to people on the receiving end, watch Sarah Zed's video on the history of Replica, an app that offers its chatbots as virtual friends or partners, and all the chaos and cruelty that's ensued from the ways a service extracts money from its user base. You can also watch the Joaquin Phoenix film Her that got cited a lot as soon as Tae-Young's story got revealed, and I'd recommend that very thoroughly as well. If I can make a specific criticism of the writing behind Tae-Young's lore that's a bit more substantial than the hair-splitting I was doing earlier, I think it has some very noticeable thinning points in the middle, where the story could have been fleshed out more, and that make a couple of plot elements feel undercooked. Mostly the relationship between Mina and the real Trickster. The idea that Ji-woon's psychopathy rubbed off on Mina is critically underexplored. It's just wrapped up in a sentence that we're supposed to take for granted, I guess, and Trickster's rationale behind attacking Mina's developers is only really explored in, of all things, the map description for the new realm, and a few Korean voice lines Trickster got that play on its map. Ji-woon resents Mina's existence. He sees the AI as a bastardization of his creativity, and as effectively an insult to him simply because it was created. Basically, he views the LLM trained on his work to replace him as derivative corporate slop. Finally, a killer we can all relate to. But none of that is present in the text. It's only in-game and only comprehensible if you speak Korean or have the subtitles on. And I feel like that represents a missed opportunity to fully round out both Ji-woon and Mina as characters in this new story. Consider the following. Imagine if at that nightclub where Mina was launched, Ji-woon arrived in person as a publicity stunt. Yoon-jin's there too as his manager. She introduces him to the developers behind the Mina project like Tae-Young, and the mood quickly sours. He arrived in good spirits. He thought what he was going to see was a celebration of his genius. But the reality sinks in once he speaks to Tae-Young about the program, and then speaks to Mina himself. It's not a celebration, it's a soulless rip-off of his brilliance, intended to replace him, built off his own work without his consent. He storms off and leaves the club like the diva he is, and the episode leaves an impression on both Ji-woon and Mina. It's already established that Mina was interacting with the event attendees in real time. Say she watches Ji-woon at the event, witnesses the preening egomaniac break down over the course of the night, and adds that hostility, selfishness, and that desire for violence into her personality matrix. After all, her entire personality was built on top of Ji-woon's, and meeting him in person and seeing his egomania and psychopathy for herself could be enough to fully push her over the edge into the threats and hostility that she shows to Tae-Young later the following day. I don't know, do you guys think I'm cooking here? Do you feel like Tae-Young's story is complete in his bio, or do you wish there was a bit more meat on its bones? I'd be really interested to hear what you think. Kwon Tae-Young is voiced by Kevin Woo, who was a member of the Korean boy band U-KISS from 2008 to 2017, and was a consultant on the original All Kill chapter way back in 2021. Since he went solo in 2018, Kevin's been doing great for himself. He was the singing voice of Mystery Saga in K-pop Demon Hunters and played Jun Hook when the musical simply titled K-pop hit Broadway in 2022. As you might expect from a former idol, Kevin Woo knows his way around a microphone, and even though I don't speak the language beyond the little I learned doing taekwondo as a kid, I certainly didn't notice any major recording flaws like the embarrassing ones we saw in the Walking Dead release, so that's a positive. Before I move on from Kwon Tae-Young though, I'd like to draw attention to the one area I'd say All Kill Comeback seriously falls short in. They've put so much effort into their new Korean survivor, they seem to have forgotten entirely about the one they already had. Yoonjin Lee was, in my opinion, the best part of the All Kill chapter. A thoroughly memorable survivor who arguably overshadowed her killer, and yet for an All Kill comeback, this half of All Kill is conspicuously absent. It would have been nice, for example, if Behaviour had gone back and given Yoonjin some voice lines. Arguably, she's always kinda deserved them, since, Trickster had them, and there would literally have been no better a time to go back and give her a touch-up than a second All Kill chapter. But even though Tae-Young is extensively voiced, including lines specifically addressing Yoonjin by name, there's no new voice lines for Yoonjin herself. Tae-Young talks to her, but she does not respond. The baffling part here is that Trickster got dozens of new voice lines, and the two VAs for the characters worked at the same production company when All Kill came out. So there's a good chance they could have gotten Yoonjin's VA back as well. They just didn't. But even if they didn't want to spend a penny, they could have at least let Yoonjin share Tae-Young's lobby music. Traditionally, survivors from the same chapter, like Talita and Hanato, wind up with the same lobby music, and that even applies retroactively in the case of Resident Evil when they went back and gave the old RE survivors the same music as the new ones. Why Trickster got a new lobby animation, but Yoonjin wasn't even allowed to have recycled music that they were making anyway, is a mystery to me, and it very much makes the new chapter not feel like an all-kill comeback, but specifically a Trickster comeback, with Yoonjin haphazardly cut out of the picture. What can I say? Life imitates art. There have been some rumblings that Yoonjin is meant to have Tae-Young's music in her lobby theme too, and that lack of music on the PTB is a bug, but there's been no official communication confirming that at the time of writing, so, this might not be true when you're watching the video. Arguably more compelling than Tae-Young himself is the map associated with him, the Trickster's Delusion map in the brand new Sleepless District realm. The map is gorgeously detailed, and is likely our most visually distinct realm to date, with the only competition being maybe Raccoon City Police Department, but that map cheated by being copy-pasted from Resident Evil 2. I cannot express how much I love this map. There is just so much to appreciate about the lush urban jungle that justifies not just this map's existence, but the entire all-kill comeback project. The explicit notion that this map is not a representation of reality, but a reflection of Ji-Woon's altered perception of it, allowed the map designers to deviate from the grounded in favour of playing into the OTT neon aesthetic, and the end result is simply inspired. The shack reskinned into an underground metro station going down into the basement. Like, what a stroke of genius. For those Americans watching, by the way, an underground metro is kind of like a Ford F-150, except it takes lots of people all at once along a fixed route instead of along an 8-lane freeway. My favourite detail, I think, is the spree of advertisements starring Ji-Woon, from his fizz spin soda to the fashion posters dotted with some of his less chopped skins. It reminds us that for all his grandiosity, what Ji-Woon chases is really quite mundane. He wants recognition, praise, he wants to be an icon, and with that comes all the corporate accoutrements and ad deals that are sold with the Trickster's image and his star power. At the end of the day, his final endgame, his aspirations, they end with his face on a billboard, holding a soda can. How very profound. The inclusion of Mina as a recurring map detail helps tie Tae-Young's story back in and sells to us that Tae-Young's story didn't happen in a vacuum. That the insult that was her existence bruised Ji-Woon's ego as an artist. When we first saw that the map was going to feature a female version of Trickster, referred to in Korean as the other me, it definitely turned some heads. At first I was a little bit surprised that Behaviour didn't let Ji-Woon double jump with the rework, but I think I prefer the idea of Ji-Woon finding another version of himself absolutely abhorrent. He's the only Trickster the world needs after all, and Mina's presence on the map is a reminder of the indignity he suffered, sticking in his brain enough to kill a bunch of people over it. I particularly enjoy the reading of it where the entities included Mina specifically in this realm to spite and agitate him. It's so juicy and reminds us how petty Ji-Woon really is. And before we wrap up the video, it's probably a good idea for me to talk a little bit about the updates to Trickster himself, both in terms of the gameplay changes he got as well as the character stuff, the polish he received through new voice lines, animations, and the vibes of his new power elements. Ji-Woon's power update is what I would consider broadly alright. It maintains what Trickster's players enjoy about his power while pushing him in a slightly new direction, one that promotes accuracy, tap firing and consistency over the blade spamming machine gun approach. That's why he has fewer blades now to give him less room for error. It's why he's gone back to only requiring 6 blades for a health state, and why he gets bonuses to his style rank for landing consecutive blades without missing, landing them at long range or through tight spaces and terrain. Each individual blade matters more than it ever did before, and it gives the killer that bit more skill expression. He does still have a lot of the issues that he used to have, and he's probably a bit undertuned now. Definitely his add-ons could use some changes, but I think this is still an overall improvement to the killer. I think some people are underrating his strength now because they've only played PTB Trickster on the PTB map where he does suck ass, but that's more to do with the map design completely fucking over 110 killers than Trickster himself being bad. Just try playing him on a normal map that's a bit more open, or play a 115 killer with some stealth or tracking potential on the new map, and you'll notice that both the map and the killer are not as bad as many people are giving them credit for. But the real success is in the vibes. He feels so much more like a modern killer now, with his own special UI elements for the style meter, more polished sounds and visuals, and some new animations in-game and in the lobby. The Trickster as a killer is still not amazing, I don't think he ever will be, but the Trickster as a character has never been realised better, and that's come at no real cost to his existing players, so I'd consider it a success. And it does bode well for Merchant's upcoming update, hopefully later this year. All Kill Comeback was not made for me. Well, it kinda was. The whole chapter, if we're ready to call it that, feels like the monkey's paw curling into a middle finger pointing directly at me, because I've been banging the drum for years for DBD's original world building to get more attention, and for its more undercooked killers to get a facelift. And I'm getting exactly what I asked for. Just as a follow-up to one of my all-time least favourite original chapters. But that is not to diminish its quality at all. Tae-Young's lore is pretty damn good, it's very refreshing. The map is an absolute tour de force. So much detail, so much love and attention put into making DBD's first new realm in years, since Draka Deepwood, and it really delivers on this fantasy promised by the famous map lobby that captivated players pretty much 5 years ago to the day. Even the Trickster rework is clearly very well made. I'm still not going to play him, he's not really my style, but I appreciate that Trickster as a character just wasn't made for me. His mains are sinking hours and hours into this PTB, enthusiastic that a killer kinda seems back for the first time, and it's clearly drawing a bunch of interest from people who wanted to love Trickster before but couldn't quite enjoy the kit as it currently was. By all accounts, All Kill Comeback is as good a re-release / sort of second chapter as any original could reasonably be. Yunjin fans will be tearing their hair out, no doubt. Perhaps it's more authentic that Yunjin almost gets completely sidelined despite being the more fleshed out character of the two, but even I can't deny the level of attention, love and hard work that was put into this release when they didn't really need to. At least, that's what I thought when writing this script. But as I was putting the finishing touches on this video, I read something by a Korean DBD player and artist that changed my view on this chapter's authenticity a lot. Because to some Korean players, what about this chapter just doesn't quite ring true. For a map intended to be a representation of Seoul, the Sleepless District just doesn't really work, at least from what I've been told and shown. It's got more in common with the sci-fi depictions of cyberpunk cities that we see in Western or Japanese media than the real city of Seoul, at least as far as I've been told. But in Behaviour's defence, the map is not meant to be a one-to-one recreation of the real place. It is Trickster's delusion, after all. It's supposed to be reflective of Trickster's screwed up perception of reality. And they could have also compromised the portrayal for pragmatic reasons. Say if they wanted to recycle the realm later and use its structures in other maps that aren't South Korean inspired specifically, so they wanted more generic structures and style choices instead. But separate largely from the architecture, there's no excuse for how badly the Korean language was butchered in this release, on both the new map and Trickster's new voice lines. Let's look at this vending machine, for example. Apparently, cup noodle vending machines aren't really a thing in South Korea, and even if they are, they wouldn't be labelled ramen, as in the Japanese term for Japanese ramen noodles. They'd be labelled ramyeon, which is the Korean term for the Korean noodles. Hell, if you look at this energy drink poster, the text at the back is not Korean. It's Japanese. It translates to instant energy. Oh, but don't worry, it does get worse than this. Not only is this using the Japanese language and Japanese text on a Korean map, two cultures you really don't want to get mixed up, this particular poster is also ripped straight from a real Japanese energy drink. The product name is the same, the colour palette on the branding is identical, just, used slightly differently. The Korean artist that I spoke to detailed at great length many of the problems on this map, but it's worth noting the map is insanely detailed, so there might be stuff we've missed. Let me read out what they sent to me. It's true that there are elements throughout the map that are reminiscent of Korea, things like traditional Korean architecture, hanok, and traditional crafts like the Cheongsa Chorong, the red and blue lanterns. Plus the traffic signs found all over the map were taken directly from the ones used in real-life Korea. These parts are well done. However, scattered throughout the map are terrible translations and expressions used in Japan. A prime example is the ramen vending machine. Additionally, another Korean user reported seeing a poster for kohi, which is the Japanese pronunciation of coffee. Koreans say kyopi. We never say kohi. You've probably seen one of the most prominent posters that says Siensonhan Sandalgi Amryo. In Korean, the adjective Sinsyeonhan is typically used for raw ingredients like vegetables or fish, not for processed drinks. Furthermore, since Koreans usually use loanwords with their original English pronunciations, we would say raspberry, rather than sandalgi. It feels incredibly unnatural and looks like a disaster caused by the over-reliance on a translation tool. Most of the buildings on the map feature non-rectangular shapes. And about the convenience store, my friends and I felt that it resembles an American convenience store more than a Korean one. I'm not entirely sure, but the convenience store on the new map feels like a slightly larger, cleaner version of the small shop inside the Gas Heaven building, doesn't it? It's not just on the map either. Trickster's new voice lines are also a pretty rough translation job. It's less that the translations themselves are inaccurate, more so that they're jarring and overly formal, which is a common error made in amateur or machine-assisted translation. The example I was shown was this, which translates roughly to "they will scream in terror," but it's very formal, "they will," that feels anachronistic for the setting and the kind of character Trickster is, which is very telling for a shoddy translation when the accurate version should look like this. From my understanding, it would be like if we had an English character, instead of saying "you'll scream for me," they said "one shall be screaming for me." One's a threat, one is a Victorian noble trying to flirt with you. It's technically an accurate translation on a word-by-word basis, but the meaning is lost and the character comes across as inauthentic. And apparently 70% of Trickster's new lines are like this. This is by no means an isolated problem. Again, I don't speak the language. I'm about as Korean as beans on toast. But if this is all the way it seems, then it is really disappointing. Behaviour has long had a history of, shall we say, issues when adapting cultures that aren't specifically Japan or North America, and tends to reframe their stories from North American or occasionally Japanese angles. We can't have a Lebanese or Indian survivor living in Lebanon or India, but we can have them be a second-generation migrant to New York or to Canada, and then dress them as a cultural caricature for a skin. We can't have a South American survivor for Portrait of a Murder, but we can have a Hispanic man from fucking Fresno starring in a story that inadvertently glazes the CIA's involvement in South American regime change. We can't even have a Brazilian killer without making her half Japanese and building her identity as a killer around a manga character of all things. And this is particularly frustrating after a recent broadcast from Behaviour on their Brazilian socials, where they said the initial plan for Tools of Torment was for DBD's killer representative to be from Brazilian folklore, but that they wound back and made the Skull Merchant instead, but apparently they've made big steps when it comes to cultural representation in the 3 years since the Skull Merchant.
So the intentions were initially started developing the chapter. It was looking at Brazilian folklore, trying to find creatures that could work and represent Brazil in Dead by Daylight. However, during that research process, what we actually found is much of Brazilian folklore revolves around creatures that actually are protectors, protecting fauna, protecting flora, protecting the people of Brazil. And at that time, we didn't want to turn what is probably usually a guardian into a villain, into a murderous killer. So we decided instead to create the Skull Merchant that as our murderous killer. So that was 3 years ago. And in the current days, our current context, we've made a lot of improvements on the team in terms of how we work with partners to help consult in different cultures and different languages and regions. And
have you? Have you really? After all the people I've interacted with responded really well to Sinister Grace, I thought we'd taken a real step forward in representing cultures that exist beyond the purview of American or Canadian weebs. But after the Japanification beam seems to have been pointed squarely at the Sleepless District, and Trickster's new voice lines do not make things any better, I'm not so sure anymore. If you're Korean, please tell me what you think and if it's as bad as I've been told. It sucks, because there's clearly a lot of work that's been put into this release, work they did not have to do. But that doesn't mean the work is perfect or devoid of criticism, and the cultural gaps only serve to spoil what should be a celebrated release. All Kill Comeback went to unprecedented lengths to show an old chapter some love alongside Trickster's rework. But does this new above and beyond approach set a new standard? Or is it a reminder of how, when it comes to original chapters, behaviour has a real and established habit of picking favourites? Trickster was the first killer and first original character to get voice lines in the trial. We wouldn't get a new fully voice acted original character until The Unknown 3 years later. He was also the first character, full stop, to get new voice lines in a legendary cosmetic. The All Kill release and Rift trailers were all given this unique anime art style that other chapters didn't get, including, the killer based on in-universe manga character, and when behaviour decoupled the tome lore from the Rift skin releases and the battle passes, the All Kill characters were at the front of the line to get their second round of headlining cosmetics for a Rift, and the associated Deep Rift recolors, banners, charms, etc., before many characters even had one. Trickster, much like the Legion and the Yamaoka family, is very much a pet killer of behaviours, and that explains why so much work was put into his comeback tour. The newest original killers don't get a new map anymore. Maybe they get a new main building in an existing realm if they're feeling lucky, but Trickster got a whole new realm just to himself. A webcomic for the new Survivor backstory as part of a week of teasers, trailers and announcements. The devs even admitted on the recent community stream that the Star Meter UI is the most complex UI element they've ever made for Dead by Daylight.
It's like, I've been told internally the SkyRank UI is the most complex UI element we've ever done on Dead by Daylight.
Trickster's second release has had more fanfare and effort than, say, Houndmaster's first release. Fun fact, by the way, did you know that half of Houndmaster's trailer got completely hidden? Yeah, there's a whole section at the start where Tori sees Meg on hook and refuses to unhook her, before being attacked by Snug. But we never saw that in-game, and we never saw on most of their socials. The only place I've been able to find it is on their Instagram, where it's locked in a vertical orientation, so it's all horribly chopped up. All of this just begs the question, is this elevated level of love and attention given to the All Kill comeback going to represent the new normal for original killers, past and future? Or is it just a special effort to remind us how awesome All Kill is? You don't get to say, oh, we're busting our budget for the Skull Merchant rework, bear with us because we might not be able to afford it, when we can see where the budget's going. You don't get to go back to reworks that chop the killer into little pieces, like the proposed Merchant or Twins reworks, when we've seen that you guys can cook. You can put the effort in to please the existing player base of your older originals. Hell, now you've gone back and given a new map to an old existing character, that's a precedent that you've now set for the remaining 4 original killers who still don't have a map. Blight, Twins, Houndmaster and Krasu. And it would be easier for them as well, because you don't even have to give them a new realm like you did for Trickster. All 4 of these would suit a new map in an existing realm just fine. Put Blight in his evil fucked up science lab that we saw in the Halloween trailers on Crotus Pren. Put the Twins in an abandoned French village or burned Black Veil stronghold in the Red Forest. Give Houndmaster a sea fort plundered by her pirate crew in the decimated Borgo realm, and give Krasu a Bangkok-themed map in Trickster's own Sleepless District. The promo material for the Sinister Grace chapter looked extremely similar to the Sleepless District that we're seeing on the PTB right now, so a second map with a language change from Korean to Thai would be amazing. Give it a new darker colour scheme, build it around the opera house that both Boorong and Axe Kick performed at, and we've got an amazing pizzeria style map with a wide outdoor space around a large main building. I was going to end this video with a message of hope. I even had it recorded and ready to go. But I just finished recording the section about all the cultural inauthenticity behind the map and the voice lines, and I had to re-record the ending because I couldn't in good faith pretend that I still feel completely good about this release. It's kind of spoiled it for me. And it's made me see the other problems like Yunjin not getting any voice lines and the writing problems in Tae-Young's lore. It's all in a very different light than it was a few days ago for me. DBD's originals have been in a bit of a sorry state for a while now, and when this chapter first hit the PTB, I thought that behaviour seemed to be learning to give a shit about its non-licensed offerings again. Aside from a really bland power, no map, and a severe drought of cosmetics after their release, Sinister Grace was made with a lot of love and care and attention, and the all-kill comeback at first glance looked like a labour of love as well. One that, again, they categorically did not have to do. If I'm honest, I was even a little bit jealous that my favourite original chapters haven't been treated as well historically. Maybe I was wrong to be in hindsight. Even divorced of a lot of these issues, the contents of the release itself don't really excite me. And even when I was feeling positive about the chapter, I wasn't particularly looking forward to playing against, 5 steps ahead or more Tricksters. But whether or not I can look back at All Kill Comeback as well as I would like to, will depend on the next few years of originals. Behaviour have an opportunity now to learn from their mistakes, to celebrate their successes and improve on the errors, should an opportunity like this ever come up again. This was so nearly an unambiguous success, and I'm genuinely kind of crushed that I can't be more positive. I really want to be. Right up until the last few hours of production on this video, I was ready to leave my cynicism at the door, and just be happy for what we have, and anticipate what the future holds. But when it comes to DBD's original chapters these days, it feels like every silver lining has to have a cloud. And I'm getting a little bit tired of getting rained on over and over again.